I'm Deborah Kan. We're here today to talk about brain supplements, what works, what doesn't, what's been proven by science. So we thought today we would talk to a world-renowned neuroscientist, Dr. Alan Snow. He's CEO of Cognitive Clarity, Inc. They make Percepta brain supplements. Alan has years of research under his belt around the brain and supplements and aging. So we're going to talk to him today about what does science really know about proving how to maintain brain health through supplements. Hi, Alan. Thanks so much for joining.
Hi. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So let's first start with aging in the brain. Tell us what happens inside our brains when we age.
Well, I come from a background where we really looked at brain aging and memory loss. Originally, I came out of University of Washington and spent a lot of years in Alzheimer's disease research. So what's happening in brain health is actually quite interesting because they're seeing a clear pattern as what is happening as you age. You start to accumulate what's called plaques that look sort of like meatballs in the brain in your 20s. And then that's followed by tangles. And so pretty much everybody over 20 probably has plaques and tangles growing in their brain. And then eventually that is leading, we find, to be an important target for memory loss. And it's actually coming to be proven in peer-reviewed publications. So it's definite that that's an important target, because once this stuff starts accumulating in your brain, it basically blocks connections, and so it's harder to remember thoughts because a thought is made up of connecting with different parts of your brain.
So when should we really start worrying about our brain health? I know, I mean, I'm a mom of 3 kids, and I know certainly during every pregnancy, I started to think my memory was getting worse and worse. When should we start taking care of our brains?
I think it's very early on that you need to start thinking about it. The research is suggesting, again, that any types of symptoms of memory loss actually need to be looked at and do something about it pretty early in your life. I would say in the late teens to 20s. But of course, you should still take supplements even in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Because what they're learning is the brain can adapt very quickly. They used to think in the old days, like, new brain cells can't be formed, and that's not true. That's been completely proven that as you're doing new things, you could actually modify your brain itself. So that's very important.
So, I mean, if you're anything like me, I'm completely confused by the supplement industry. It seems like every week there's a new brain supplement coming out. So from a consumer's perspective, how do we really know what works and what doesn't?
So what I suggest, the lead is good science. And there is a lot of brain supplements coming out, as you said, every day. I mean, there's probably thousands and thousands that are coming out every month. And so the number one thing I would say to consumers is you really got to look at who is backing the products and what's the science behind it. If you have companies that are just trying to sell products and they have no science behind it, that is not good. I would suggest really looking at who is actually talking about the science, who's making the product, what research studies have they done, do they understand the mechanism of action? And it's very important about quality, safety, and efficacy. Just like anything that academia is doing, pharmaceutical companies doing, the same thing needs to hold true in the dietary supplement field.
So we have a question coming in about how is it necessary to do things like get blood work done before you take supplements? I mean, should supplements really address deficiencies? Are we looking for deficiencies within our own body to determine which supplements we should take?
I don't think you need to do any blood testing. I think that just like you take a vitamin for your body, you need to take a vitamin for your brain, basically. And so my suggestion is to go out and look at what the research is behind certain products. And so if I was looking at a certain brain supplement, I say, okay, so what are they? What's the mechanism? What are they trying to do here? But just like a vitamin, you need to take a vitamin for your brain. It's pretty obvious.
So, Ellen, how much do we need to take, though? I mean, when you buy a supplement, you're really relying on the manufacturer to say you need this much in a pill. But how do we know what's effective in terms of the concentration?
Yeah, that's a very important question. What a lot of the supplement companies are doing, especially when I came from academia to developing drugs, now going into the dietary supplement field, I find there's a lot of people just taking studies and then taking studies with a single ingredient, and then throwing it into a mixture of 10 to 20 ingredients into a brain supplement, and oral bioavailability is very important. So a lot of the stuff, when you mix it together, doesn't really get into the brain. So that's very important. I would say that I would be going after brain supplements that only have 1 to 3 ingredients, not 10 to 20, because if they have more, it's all the ingredients are being diluted, and about 50 to 70% actually doesn't even get into your brain.
Okay, and we have a question coming in about does taking a supplement versus, is there a difference between taking a supplement versus getting vitamins through your food?
It's a good question. We've been very interested, for instance, in polyphenols, and I think polyphenols are very good for the brain, and there's been a lot of research on that.
Tell us what polyphenols are, Ellen. What are polyphenols?
Okay. Polyphenols are stuff like in blueberries and green tea and tea itself, oolong tea. So there's a variety, red wine, apples, grapeseed extract, for example. All of these are substances that have been shown actually to target to some extent plaques and tangles, which I believe is the real reason we're losing memory as we age. And studies have shown if you could actually reduce those in your brain, you could actually improve your memory, and that's been shown. So we've been very interested in looking at that. We identified some amazing ingredients in a plant that grows in the Amazon rainforest called cat's claw.
And when you say amazing results, what does that mean? I mean, how do we know that these supplements are actually improving our brain health?
So, of course, gold standards is human testing, and they're actually doing memory tests, a variety of cognition tests that are pretty simple, like a shopping list. And this is where you have to remember names and in a certain order, and then you have to repeat it, let's say 20 minutes later. So some of this has to do with short-term memory. And if you want to, if you're worried about memory loss and brain health, I think they both go together. So that's pretty important.
And we have another question coming in. Someone's asking, are supplements FDA approved, and really how long do you have to take them before you know they're having an impact?
So one of the problems in the dietary supplement industry is they're not FDA approved. They really don't have to go through human clinical trials like drugs do. But there is an FDA disclaimer in each dietary supplement box that says it's not intended to prevent, cure, diagnose, or treat any disease. So you definitely have to stay away from making disease claims, and that's very important as well.
So we have another question. Someone's asking, well, you said 3 ingredients. This gentleman is asking, how many ingredients do researchers think should go into brain supplements to make it work effectively? But I take it actually one step further and saying, like, how important is actually the combination between supplements? Do some make others more effective? Do some negate the effects?
Yeah, we've actually done research on this, and it's very interesting. We found that once you start mixing up supplements, it does negate some of the individual ingredients' effects. And people in the brain health industry have not really come across this. They think that if they take 10 ingredients that individually are supposed to work singly by themselves, when you put it together, it should have the same efficacy. We actually found that not to be true at all. In fact, when you have ingredients that seem to work at, let's say, reducing plaque load, for example, and improving cognition or memory, we find that that combination actually can knock out some of the ingredients that work individually. So that's a really interesting finding.
How would we as consumers possibly know that?
You wouldn't. And in fact, there hasn't been a lot of research looking at the combination of ingredients. One of the things, that they do is they look at the combination and put that combination in a clinical trial or human study, or even in other types of understanding the mechanism of action studies, more in vitro preclinical testing types of things. That really needs to be done more and more. It is a problem, I believe, in the brain health industry.
So, Ellen, tell us a little bit about what we should stay away from. I mean, there's such a lot of marketing dollars are going into really promoting brain supplements. And earlier in this conversation, we talked about the thousands that are out there.
Yep.
So, what are some of the bad practices that we should know about in order to stay away?
Well, I think you have to really look at quality control, safety. One of the things that we're doing in our Perceptor products is we actually look at the safety of the ingredients, individual ingredients on their own, and then we look at its efficacy. So for instance, we have a proprietary assay where our target is plaques and tangles, and we could actually take the ingredients and see if it's working. But that's not the end of the study, because you go through manufacturing and production. You should be testing it for both safety and efficacy at that stage. And then once it's bottled and sealed, before it goes into humans, you need to be testing for efficacy again. And a lot of the brain supplement companies do not do this. So they may do it once early in the stage, but they're not doing it at the end. It's very important.
So, tell us a little bit about tracking our cognition. I often say, "Oh, I'm losing my memory," but how do I really know I'm losing my memory? How should people, as they age, keep track of how their memory is doing?
Well, there's different memory games, as you know, on the internet. There could be teasers. There are ways where they could actually quantitate if you're improving in like short-term memory, word recall, puzzles, all that kind of stuff. You could start to notice, it's very subtle, but you could actually quantitate it by playing games in which you could actually get scores. And there's a lot of them on the internet. If you really are worried about your memory loss, I would, advise you see a neurologist, because you don't want to get worse. I mean, the stages are, forgetfulness, forgot my keys. That's probably not something to be worried about. But if you forget sort of where you parked your car and where you're going and where your address is, I mean, the early thing is you could end up with mild cognitive impairment.
So if you're at a point where you're already losing memory, let's say you've been diagnosed with MCI, is it too late to take supplements?
It's not too late. And I
How
believe
do we know that?
Well, there's been sort of studies where they actually tested sort of specific components, and this is more like drug companies are going perhaps after some of the same targets, such as plaques and tangles, and then they could actually test in, different types of memory tests. There are very well qualified, like mini mental state examination. You could really see, if there's an improvement, if you really wanted to test it. And what's going on in the drug industry is they're actually doing PET imaging studies, so you could actually look at the plaque load in your brain. And some people are very worried about going and get scanned.
But I mean, at least in the US, those scans aren't covered by insurance. And so, they come at a hefty price. Most people aren't going to do that.
That's right. It's very expensive. So, if you're really worried about your memory loss, I would be consulting a neurologist, and he would put you through the proper studies to see where you're at.
So, should we be taking supplements to reduce inflammation? Is that the right direction to head in? Presuming that if we stave off inflammation, perhaps the degenerative process won't begin in our brains.
Yeah, it's been very difficult to actually go after neuroinflammation, but actually one of the ingredients that we looked at, cat's claw, is known to be a potent anti-inflammatory agent. And so we have something that actually is going after plaques, tangles, and inflammation with a natural product.
When you say improve cognition, is that preventing our brains, or is it actually boosting our brain health?
So our studies have found that we could do both, actually. So we could inhibit the formation of plaques and tangles, and once it's there, we could actually cause a disaggregation and dissolution. And it's quite interesting that something is being able to do both and actually work on both plaques and tangles and on the inflammation component. So I think it's very exciting actually to have something that could be natural, that you could take as a vitamin for your brain, and you could hit it at all phases as you're growing older.
So, Alan, could you tell us, like, as a scientist, what goes into this type of research? How do you approach this, and how do you prove that it has efficacy?
So it's a lot of research. Over the years, we've actually been funded by the National Institute of Aging and different types of grants. We have personally spent 29,000 hours in scientific research. There's actually about 50 issued patents on the use of cat's claw for brain health, which actually my labs have done most of the research in this topic. So it's very important that you listen to, for a brain supplement, actually not to salespeople, but people who have actually done the studies and know the science. And I believe it's important to listen to the people who have actually been involved in the actual science itself. And of course, publication in peer-reviewed journals is very important, and we're doing that. And so Rudy and I come from very vigorous testing backgrounds. And so we wouldn't put anything with our name of it until we know the science is very good.
We have another question coming in from a viewer asking, okay, well, you talked about Perceptin stuff, but what age, should kids start taking it? At what age would you recommend people start taking a supplement?
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because I see a lot of brain supplements that are for kids now, and I'm a little bit worried about that. So I think that...
Why are you worried about that?
In young kids, there's brain development that goes on even, from a few years old to early adulthood. So I think their learning memory is a little bit different than the aging process once you're about 20 years old. So I think there needs to be more research in that area. For example, for our product, as long as it's safe and not really doing anything, and we have a lot of research that it's very safe, I just wouldn't suggest it for kids, like anywhere from born to like 15 years old.
So we should start thinking about it in our 20s?
Yeah, I'd say people in their late teens would be okay. And from that onward should be taking something for their brain health.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Alan Snow, for sharing your research with us. Certainly is an area a lot of people need to know more about, and certainly a lot more research like yours needs to occur. So we thank you so much for sharing some of that research with us, and also your expertise.
Well, thank you very much. It's been nice talking to you and your viewers.
Okay.